Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Data Provided. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we're going to explore Celine Song's new film, Materialist, and explore some of the interpersonal communication themes presented in the film. More specifically, we're going to focus on the two types of love that she explores, Eros and Pragma. Also, stay tuned for this week's Ask Dr. Shepard, where we'll talk about dealing with friends who do not support your chosen romantic partner. So when it comes to Materialist, it's a film about the current perceptions versus realities of the dating economy in which many currently find themselves in. Put simply, it kind of explores the modern-day relationships expectations of love versus functional coupling. If you haven't seen the movie yet and want to watch it without any spoilers whatsoever, you might want to skip this episode or just skip to the end for Ask Dr. Shepard, though my exploration of the film will focus on the two types of love and not necessarily the full details of the film. With that said, the film for me is about choosing between two types of love from the color wheel theory of love. As we explored earlier on an episode, John Allen Lee, a Canadian psychologist, described 6 types of love using several Latin and Greek terms or words for love. The 2 forms, though, of love that were explored for me in the film are pragma and eros. But before we delve exactly into the nuts and bolts of how those appear in the film, just to give a brief overview or reminder for those that have seen the film is centered around Lucy, played by Dakota Johnson, who is a successful matchmaker who works for a matchmaking company named Adore. Essentially, Lucy spends her time setting up singles who are eager to mingle and help them find love. And ultimately, the story follows her own trajectory with finding love. So essentially, enter the 2 other protagonists. At her client's wedding, Lucy catches the eye of Harry, played by Pedro Pascal, who we come to find out is a rich private equity individual. And at the same wedding, she runs into her ex-boyfriend, John, played by Chris Evans, who is there working as a cater waiter, but he ultimately is an actor at heart. And it comes out that I guess him and Lucy kind of probably met while they were poor young actors, and she's given up the dream of being an actor in order to become a matchmaker. And what's interesting about this setup is at the wedding, she actually goes and talks to the bride beforehand. And this is where we get our first taste of pragma, which, just a reminder for people, is kind of when you are practical with your love. Pragma lovers are pragmatic. They're goal-oriented lovers who rely on reasoning and practical consideration when selecting a potential partner. So Lucy meets with this bride who's having jitters, who is thinking about being a runaway bride, and Lucy asks her, "Why do you want to be married?" And she says, "This will stay between us. I've heard any answer in the book, nothing will surprise me." And ultimately, the bride-to-be says that she wants to be married, especially to this gentleman, because he sees her value. And so this underscores one of the trajectories of love that Dakota is balancing between Harry, played by Pedro Pascal, and John, played by Chris Evans, who is more so Eros. So as I said, pragma is practical lovers. They tend to select and or reject partners based on what they perceive as desirable compatibility traits. And so throughout Dakota setting up different people, she runs through this list throughout the film of traits that people want or traits that people don't want. There's a montage in the film where you get one person who literally is talking in terms of she's a white woman and she's not interested in dating anybody who's not white. You have other people talking about their preference for height, how they won't date anybody under a certain height requirement. Other people talking about essentially they won't date people who don't make under X amount of money, so on and so forth. So pragmatic lovers usually want to find value in their partner and ultimately want to work with their partner to reach a common goal. So this bride-to-be at the beginning clearly feels valued by her partner. And as we explore the story of Materialist, we see that Pedro Pascal, the rich private equity partner, finds value in Lucy, and he is offering this pragmatic type of love. I see value in you, you see value in me, we can figure out life together. So with Pragma, right, the practicality and realism of pragmatic love oftentimes contributes, people argue, to this longevity of the relationship as long as there are common goals and values that are shared during their time together. Usually, pragmatic lovers have excessive thinking along these lines that causes the relation to be seen for what it is, ultimately a trade or an exchange or a utility. And the emphasis within pragmatic relationships is usually on earning, affordability, childcare, cooking, home services, travel, access. All of these things kind of come down. When I think about pragmatic lovers, these are people who have a laundry list of what they want in a partner, and they're trying to find someone that checks off as many boxes on that list for them. Sometimes there are non-negotiables on that list, and other times there are things that maybe they will not necessarily hold a grudge if they can't find it. And I'm reminded of a personal example. I remember I had a friend who was interested in one of my other friends, and he was telling me, well, why didn't you introduce me to this person? I was like, well, they don't fit any of these quote unquote lists that you have, right? They have to have X type of education. They have to be making X type of money. But here you've met this person, you're captivated by them, you enjoy them, but they don't fit your pragmatic viewpoint of love. And so I'm no longer friends with that person for a multitude of reasons. But I oftentimes wonder, did their perceptions of love change potentially from that pragmatic form? And so we know that pragmatic love is oftentimes a form of cooperation. And in collectivist cultures where arranged marriage is oftentimes practiced, pragmatic love is very common. You have families that come together and say, hey, I have a son, I have a daughter, and they're around similar age. These are similar values or upbringings. I think they would work well together. And we've seen, especially from different cultures that do practice arranged marriages, that these marriages can grow out of their practicality. But what they oftentimes lack, and as the film explores, is that intense passion. So that's Eros, right? That's an intense love that usually focuses on early self-disclosure, sentimental expressions, and a quick falling in love period. So these feelings are usually strong, both emotionally and physically. Oftentimes begins with a partner who is a stranger and evokes immediate excitement. So those butterflies that you maybe feel when you meet somebody. They're oftentimes exclusive, but hopefully not possessive. And they're ready for love. They're ready for the risk. So when I think about this film, Materialist, Celine Song is kind of showing you these two forms of love. And I don't necessarily think she makes a value judgment, even though the character ultimately picks somebody. But she shows you that in this dating economy that we exist within currently, that sometimes, especially when you do these dating apps, let's say, and you can filter out people by race, by age, by height, by location, by religion, by if they want to have kids, if they don't want to have kids, right? You can be very pragmatic about finding someone that aligns with you on paper, but just because they align with you on paper does not necessarily mean you'll have that spark. But maybe that spark will grow, maybe it won't. Where on the flip side, you might have Eros, where you have this strong connection with someone, an emotional, a physical, a mental connection with them. But it's a risk because a lot of things maybe don't line up on paper. And so what do you decide to do in a world where oftentimes you're not going to have this passion and pragmatism wrapped into one? And so for me, I think that's what the film is really exploring and what I think a lot of people are missing. I've seen a lot of comments around the film talking about kind of its quote unquote broke boy propaganda, how it's, telling people to quote unquote settle potentially. And I don't think that the auteur of the film, right, is making that decision. I think she is putting up a mirror to the current dating economy and clearly doing it through a matchmaking service, not an app, right? But apps are matchmaking services if we're being honest about their functionality, and they can become quote unquote better matchmaking services the more you pay. All of these apps have a free aspect to them where you can join them for free, but you'll run out of matches or you won't necessarily get the prime matches. But if you pay for them, you get unlimited likes, you can move your location, you can take out people. So I think on Hinge, I was on one of my friends' Hinge. I think it gives you aspects of where don't show me any of these people if some of these aspects don't align, and they'll do that for you for free. However, if you pay for Hinge, you can have even more filters to use. So I think the film ultimately, I fully enjoyed it. I think I'll watch it again. I think it might also be a film that I'll show in my own interpersonal communication course because it's holding up a mirror to where we are right now. If we think about the history of marriage and we think about how it has evolved over time, and there are great books about this, great articles that exist about this, at first, and the film also explores this in a sense, where she thinks about, well, what was the first ever marriage like? Why did they get married? What was the impetus for them to do this? And we think about cave people is where that begins for this film, and why did they do it? And we don't necessarily get an answer, but it is an interesting question to think about, and then how we have evolved from those ancient times to today. And they reference how, before there was a dowry, right? What can I offer? What can my family offer so that you take me as this woman? What am I now falling in love because of feelings? And so we know essentially with the history of dating and how marriage has evolved is that it did used to be more communal, where your community would come together, where you would have dates, quote unquote, outside in front of the house. That is very kind of 19th century, early 20th century, where you maybe had an enclosed porch. I'm thinking about a book I had read where a woman was talking about how, the elders in your family would kind of matchmake you, and you would have a date on the porch and they could be within earshot and see, how things were going. And that was kind of where you would have multiple dates until they got comfortable. And there were no real third spaces back then. But as the rise of third spaces with bars and saloons came around in the 1910s and 20s, and clearly prohibition in 30s and 40s, right, but no prohibition, how it evolved to now being taken outside of the house. So your dating would first be in the house, right, around family, around trusted family friends. And now it kind of evolved into outside third spaces. I'd say we seen it evolve even further to clubs, right? A lot of late night spaces. And then we see the rise of the digital age, where the majority of dating is now not taking place because you ran into somebody at a coffee shop or at a bar or at a restaurant or a concert. It's happening on an app. And a lot of people have even explored this, where people will be at the club and they'll maybe go online on hookup apps, for instance, and they'll be talking to someone who's literally in the club. And instead of having a more face-to-face conversation, they're at least initiating it on the app. And then maybe they meet in the club and decide if they want to go home afterwards, or maybe they decide to just leave the club and go on about their life. And so we see how technology has even changed how we are even starting to date. So with that, Celine does explore a little bit of the technological implications with dating, but I think it's something that she doesn't necessarily focus on, because while technology has become something that has revolutionized the dating space in a sense, the nuts and bolts of Pragma versus Eros are a tale as old as time. Am I going to fall in love with you eventually because we look good on paper, or do I actually have this emotional deep connection with you? And while we maybe don't make the most sense on paper, we'll figure it out because we have such a strong bond of trust, of support, of emotional closeness, all those things that we talked about in earlier episodes that are bedrocks of a relationship. So for me, ultimately, as I said before, I rather enjoyed the movie because of these explorations. Of course, the protagonist, Dakota Johnson's Lucy, makes her choice between Harry, Pedro Pascal, and John, Chris Evans. It's not left up to the viewer to decide what she will do or won't do. But I think it explores the positives and potential negatives of both types of love. And therefore, I think it is a great talking point for people, especially when we talk about dating in this current landscape. And of course, the landscape will change even more. We talk about AI, we talk about these different apps, we talk about money, right? Access, right? So if I have money and I'm able to hire a matchmaker, as is the case for the majority of the people in this film, I'm kind of outsourcing this aspect, this very personal aspect I'm outsourcing to somebody else. And to me, what I think is interesting, especially someone that's in this space of interpersonal communication, I am a certified relationship coach, right? Is the fact that why would someone, and I don't think it's a value judgment, I think people need to figure it out. Why would you outsource such an important part of your own life for someone else to figure out? And I think there are valid answers to that. And I also think that there are maybe some invalid answers to that, depending on where you fall on the spectrum. But I think that's an important question for all of us to ask. Why would I want someone basically to outsource? And when you outsource it, usually you're outsourcing it for them to use Pragma. You give them a list of things that you're looking for in someone, and they will then try and bring you someone that matches those laundry list of categories. That might be right, that might be wrong, but oftentimes, as this film explored, and as other resources have explored and films and TV shows have explored, is usually when you're goal oriented, you don't necessarily have that spark, at least at first. And so then you have to figure out if that's something that you feel comfortable or confident about. It's not right, it's not wrong, but I do think it is rare, especially in this dating economy, to have Pragma and Eros together. I don't think those really exist in this current iteration of dating. So that is kind of my brief engagement or review of Materialist. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to watch it and think about your own dating life or dating history, what you desire out of this dating economy, and figure out how can you go about it better. So for instance, if you are relying more on Pragma and you have been a little disillusioned because you're not finding those actual connections, then maybe you might want to think about a different way around dating. Or on the flip side, if you're very Eros about that passion, about that intense connection, but these relationships keep falling apart, maybe there's a way to be a little more practical without losing that appeal. And of course, everything is communicator, context, and content specific, as I've always said, right? Those 3 C's. Depending on what works for you, might not work for your friend, might not work for me, might not work for another listener of this podcast. But I think it's important, especially when it comes to interpersonal communication, that we think about what do we truly desire? What are our non-negotiables? And how can I go about doing that in the most effective and also ethical way? With that said, that brings us to the Ask Dr. Shepard for the week, which is somewhat related. So for this week's Ask Dr. Shepard, it is, "Hi there. My name is Keith, and I've been in a relationship with my partner for almost 2 years now. Unfortunately, my friends don't seem to like him, and while they are cordial with him, they don't seem to be rooting for our relationship to succeed. Things are serious with my partner, but I just hate that my close friends are not supportive of my relationship and the choices I've made. My friends think I can do better with a partner who has a better job and matches me more on paper, but I'm genuinely happy and I don't know how to get them on board. I broached the subject once before with my friends and they told me essentially that they support me, but I just don't feel as if they support us. What do you think I should do?" Well, this is a great question, Keith. And I think with this limited data, right, off the data provided, I think, of course, you need to broach the topic again. And I also think you need to step back and figure out, what does support look like for you? So when we think also about relationships, and I touched upon it briefly about kind of the history and trajectory of relationships, we also forget that marriage and what the actual wedding was designed to be was for two separate communities to come together and bridge that gap, right? The wedding was designed to bridge the gap, to unite two distinct communities into one, and for those communities to be there to support this unification of this couple. So when we think about originally kind of the wedding registry, this was people providing things for you to set up your home, your house. So it wasn't just giving you money. It wasn't buying you super expensive things. It was buying you practical things. You need a bed. You need sheets. You need towels. You need dishes. You need silverware. You need all these things. And it was to help you prepare you for this next chapter in your life. So thinking about that and taking a step back, I think it's important to figure out, clearly you said these are close friends, so I assume these are friends for the lifetime. Remember, we've talked about friends for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. So if these are your lifetime friends, these are the friends that you're going to want to rally around you when you hit a rough patch. So you do need to go back to them and talk to them about what support looks like for you. So if you do have an issue with your partner, you don't want them to be the first to say, break up with him, or break up with them, or break up with her. You want to make sure that they are going to support you and help you work your way through whatever that issue is, unless that issue is a non-negotiable for you, and then you got to go, right? So first and foremost, I think it's taking a step back and figuring out, what does support look like for you? What are they not doing which you would like them to do? That's first. Then you come to them and ask them if they're willing and or able. And if they're not willing or not able, then they really have that conversation about why. This is the person that I've chosen, that I truly love, I would argue, right? You've been with them for almost 2 years, as you say, so I would assume you're in love. And so you want them, because you love them as well, to support you in this union. And because this is a person that you might soon be deciding to spend the rest of your life with. And you envision them in your life, your friends in your life for the rest of your life. These are lifetime friends. And you're going to envision your partner in your life for the rest of your life. And so while they don't necessarily need to fully love the person and hang out with them one-on-one or do all these things, they do have to realize that you're both ideally going to be in each other's life for a while. So how can we make it work? And what are the reasons why you ultimately don't like my partner? Is it really just because you think I can do quote unquote better when I am doing better, right? And your definition of better is not the definition I've signed up for. What you desire in a partner is not necessarily what they may be desiring a partner for you. And that's okay. But they have to realize that ultimately it's you who is going to make these decisions. And I also think it's important to figure out, are they saying things every now and then, or did they kind of just say it once? And that was that. And I bring that up because I have a very close friend, a lifetime friend, who I've never liked basically anybody that she's been in a relationship with. And we had a funny interaction about it a few years ago where she was talking about one of her exes. And I was like, yeah, I never liked her. And she was like, wait a minute. I mean, I know you told me that once. I was like, well, yeah, once is all I need to tell you. I'm not in your relationship, so I don't know the day-to-day goings on. I get clearly the highlight reel and the low light reel, right? When things are super great, you'll tell me. When maybe you hit a snag, you'll tell me something. But I'm not in your relationship day to day. So I told you I don't care for this person. But ultimately, if this is the person you're going to decide to be with, I'm going to support you. But I'm not going to be telling you, well, I don't like her. Or, I told you I don't like her every 2 minutes. Why? That's not productive. So I would hope, as these people are lifetime friends, that they're not doing that. But if they are, I think that's one thing you need to check them on, right? I'm aware that you're not necessarily the biggest fan, but you telling me this every time maybe we have a little issue or I talk to you about them is not productive at all for our friendship, and might lead to me also resenting you a little bit and might cause a schism in our friendship. So I think based on the limited data provided, that these are some things to work on and to figure out. And hopefully these will help Make your relationship with your friends closer, right? Because clearly if you feel some animosity towards them because they're not supporting your relationship, that's not great. And also help you get closer with your partner as well, because people who've clearly been in your life probably before your partner came around, them not necessarily being a fan of your partner might have you second guessing or questioning your decision. So that's what I would say to do, Keith. Hopefully it helps. Hopefully it makes you all stronger in your interpersonal communication in your relationships. And if you do have an update, I would love to hear how that conversation goes. With that said, that brings us to the end. So I will see you all on the next one. Goodbye.